On my 67th birthday, I sent 6 simple words to the family group chat. I miss you guys so much. Hours passed without a single reply. Then my daughter-in-law texted, "We're on vacation. Don't be so dramatic." That was the moment I opened my banking app and changed everything. A single sentence can change everything I thought as I stared at my phone. At 8 o'clock that morning on my 67th birthday, I had typed those 6 simple words into the family group chat. It wasn't meant as a guilt trip or a complaint, just a quiet greeting on my special day sent out into the digital void. Hours passed and absolutely nothing happened. No emojis, no quick reactions, just the cold gray check marks showing the message had been read. It wasn't until late afternoon that a private text from my daughter-in-law, Brooke, finally lit up my screen. "We're on vacation. Don't be so dramatic." The words appeared in cold, flawless lettering. My son Ethan seemed perfectly content to go along with it because I didn't hear a single word from him all day. I carefully set my phone down on the kitchen table, finished my coffee, and felt a deep sense of clarity wash over me. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was simply the final result of years of slowly growing disrespect that I had tolerated for far too long. Since my husband passed away, I had allowed Ethan and Brooke to occupy the spacious main floor of the house, while I moved into the small apartment above the garage. On top of that, the joint account used to pay the property taxes, insurance, and utilities had remained entirely in my name for years. I had left things that way out of habit and because I wanted to give the young family a financial advantage. But respect isn't something you can buy. At some point, you have to claim it. I opened the banking app on my tablet, calmly navigated to the account settings, and revoked their debit card access with a few taps. Effective immediately, the account was locked to outside users. It wasn't a petty act of revenge. It was simply a long overdue financial separation. Then I sat beside the window and waited for the inevitable storm. The silence lasted exactly until Brooke tried to pay for gas at a station near their resort. Within 20 minutes, my phone was vibrating non-stop across the wooden kitchen table. 37 missed calls eventually lit up the display, a blinking flood of panic and sudden attention. Ethan called 3 times while Brooke dialed my number again and again as though her life depended on it. I ignored every single call. Instead, I watered the geraniums on my porch and prepared myself a quiet dinner. It was nearly midnight when Ethan finally sent a blunt text. "What did you do?" "The card isn't working. This is incredibly embarrassing. Not a single mention of my birthday. No apology for Brooke's message. No acknowledgement of how they had treated me. His entire concern centered on the frozen money." I typed a short reply. "I changed the access permissions. We'll sort it out calmly when you get back." After sending it, I switched my phone off completely and slept more peacefully than I had in months. The following morning, the house felt remarkably light. Sunlight streamed through the spotless windows, and the familiar weight of constant expectation seemed to have disappeared. I knew this decision marked the beginning of a major change, but for the first time in years, I felt completely ready for it. My years of quietly paying for everything, keeping the peace and serving as the invisible provider had officially ended with a single click. If someone only notices your value when your wallet closes, they missed the point long ago. I grabbed my tote bag and headed out for my daily walk to the local market. 2 days later, I heard their large SUV crunch into the gravel driveway. The doors slammed shut one after another, making it obvious that the trip home had not improved anyone's mood. A few moments later, heavy footsteps pounded up the wooden stairs leading to my apartment. Brooke didn't even wait for me to open the door fully. She pushed past me and marched straight into the entryway. "What is this childish game, Eleanor?" she snapped while Ethan lingered behind her with his head lowered. "We could barely pay for the rental car in cash because you locked us out of the account." I remained calm, standing in the doorway with my arms relaxed at my sides. "The account is in my name, Brooke, and I need those funds for my own expenses moving forward," I said quietly. For a brief moment, Ethan met my eyes. Then he looked away again, just as he always did whenever things became uncomfortable. "Mom doing that in the middle of our trip was completely uncalled for," he muttered. Brooke immediately demanded the new login information, and reminded me that the quarterly property tax bill was due the following week. I gave a faint smile, shook my head, and pulled a prepared binder from a nearby shelf. Inside were years of organized utility statements and household expenses. Starting next month, everyone pays their own share directly to the city, I explained matter-of-factly. Brooke stared at me in disbelief. Then she let out a dismissive snort. Well, don't expect us to keep picking up your groceries every weekend. The comment was clearly intended as a threat. It didn't affect me at all. In truth, I preferred doing my own shopping. Without another word, Brooke spun around and grabbed Ethan by the sleeve, pulling him back downstairs to their apartment. I watched them leave, closed my door, and returned the binder to the shelf. For the first time in years, the rules were changing, and this time I wasn't asking anyone for permission. The days that followed were marked by an icy, deliberate silence throughout the property. Nobody greeted each other in the driveway anymore, and my grandchildren were noticeably kept away from me. Brooke was clearly trying to punish me with the silent treatment, but her strategy missed the mark entirely. On Saturday morning, I carried my laundry basket downstairs to the shared laundry room and immediately noticed something was wrong. My usual spot had been blocked. Piles of Brooke's laundry were stacked directly on top of my washing machine, and the machine itself had been unplugged. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I simply picked up my basket and carried it back upstairs. Rather than starting a confrontation, I called a local contractor I had known for years. By Monday morning, his van was parked in the driveway, and he was installing a dedicated washer and dryer hookup in my upstairs bathroom. When Ethan arrived home from work and spotted the service truck, he came straight upstairs. "What's going on?" "This is a total waste of money. We have plenty of room downstairs," he said, clearly annoyed. "There's no room left for my things downstairs," Ethan, I replied, while the plumber worked on the new water lines. When the job was finished, I paid the $1,200 invoice in cash without asking them for a single cent. From the yard, Brooke watched the entire process through the kitchen window with a dark expression on her face. She was slowly beginning to realize that her little acts of sabotage weren't creating the emotional reaction she wanted. Instead, they were producing permanent changes. Piece by piece, I was reclaiming my independence. Piece by piece, I was reducing our daily interactions to almost nothing, and every dollar I spent on those improvements felt worthwhile. The next conflict surfaced quickly, and this time it centered on the shared car. My old sedan usually sat in the garage because I rarely drove long distances anymore. Over time, Ethan and Brooke had gotten comfortable using it whenever they needed to run errands, take weekend trips, or handle family obligations. Most of the time, they didn't even bother asking first. One Tuesday morning, I was getting ready for a doctor's appointment when I noticed the car keys were missing from their usual hook by the door. I walked downstairs and knocked. Brooke answered, wearing loungewear. "Ethan took your car to work today. His truck is at the mechanic," she said casually while looking past me. "I wrote that appointment on the kitchen calendar a week ago," I reminded her. "Well, we forgot. Just call an Uber." She began closing the door before I could respond. I didn't try to stop her. Instead, I walked back upstairs and called a local taxi. The ride to the doctor was expensive, but it gave me plenty of uninterrupted time to think. By the time my appointment was finished, I had made a decision. Rather than returning home immediately, I instructed the driver to take me directly to the local dealership. That afternoon, I signed the paperwork and sold the car. The dealership offered a fair trade-in value of $8,500 and arranged for a flatbed truck to collect it before the end of the day. When Ethan arrived home and saw the empty garage space, he stormed upstairs, completely blindsided. "Where's the car, Mom? I have to drive out to a client first thing tomorrow morning," he demanded. "I sold it. I don't drive enough to justify keeping it anymore," I replied while calmly sipping my tea. He stared at me as though I had started speaking a foreign language. Then he turned around and walked out without another word. Losing access to that car affected them far more than they wanted to admit. Suddenly, Brooke had to coordinate carpools, arrange rides, and rely on public transportation to get the kids to soccer practice. The inconvenience disrupted the carefully controlled routine she had built around the assumption that my resources would always be available. The balance of power inside the house shifted dramatically within a matter of weeks, and not once had I raised my voice. For the first time, they were being forced to recognize something they had overlooked for years. My quiet contributions had been holding much of their comfortable lifestyle together. Over the weekend, they hosted a large backyard barbecue for friends and neighbors. In the past, I would have spent days helping prepare for events like that. I would have made side dishes, marinated meat, organized supplies, and stayed afterward to help clean everything up. This time, I did something different. I bought a new novel, packed a blanket, and took the bus to a nearby state park. The entire afternoon was spent sitting in the sunshine, reading and enjoying the peaceful solitude. When I returned that evening, the party was over. The downstairs kitchen looked like a disaster area. Brooke stood at the sink, surrounded by dirty dishes, while Ethan sat at the table, staring blankly at his phone. "You could have at least helped us with the potato salad," Eleanor Brooke said bitterly as I walked past. I wasn't invited. Brooke and I had other plans today, I added with a polite but distant smile. Then I went upstairs, locked my door, and settled into the comfort of my clean apartment. The guilt they kept trying to project onto me simply had nowhere left to land. One Thursday evening, there was a hesitant knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Ethan standing there alone, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. He looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with work. "Can we talk for a minute, Mom?" he asked, using the warm title he hadn't used in a very long time. I stepped aside and invited him in. We sat together at the small dining table by the window while he placed the mugs between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. "Brooke and I are barely keeping our heads above water with the bills and the kids' schedules right now," he began carefully. I listened without interrupting. Then he laid out his proposal. He suggested restoring the joint account, and in return promised that they would involve me more in their daily lives. We could start doing family dinners on weekends again, and you'd get to see the grandkids, more often, he offered. The proposal was transparent. What he was really asking for wasn't family closeness. It was the return of the old arrangement that had made their lives easier. I took a slow sip of tea and looked directly at my son. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel hurt. Mostly I felt pity. "Ethan, you don't actually want me in your daily life. You want your financial cushion and your free help back," I said calmly. His eyes immediately dropped to his lap. He knew I had seen straight through the offer. "The joint account is gone for good, and the expenses for this property will be divided strictly by square footage from now on." I continued. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He simply sat there quietly for another few minutes, finished his tea, and left. The leverage they thought they still had no longer existed. I had already removed it. After that conversation, one thing became crystal clear. Living under the same roof no longer had a future. The constant proximity created a tension neither side could ignore, and I had no desire to spend the remaining years of my life navigating that kind of atmosphere. Quietly, without telling anyone, I began looking at small, low-maintenance townhouses a few miles away in a peaceful neighborhood. Since the property had been left equally to Ethan and me after my husband's death, I was fully within my rights to make my own plans. It didn't take long to find exactly what I wanted. The townhouse was modest single-story and located near a walking trail I immediately fell in love with. The rooms were bright, the upkeep was manageable, and the entire place felt peaceful. I signed the paperwork at the escrow office and paid the down payment entirely from my personal savings. Only after every legal detail was finalized did I bring the official documents home. One evening, I laid the buyout paperwork on the kitchen table directly in front of Ethan. "I'm selling my half of the property, Ethan. You have 90 days to secure financing and buy me out, or we'll need to put the entire house on the market." Brooke happened to walk into the room just as I said it. The color drained from her face. For the first time since I had known her, her usual confidence completely disappeared. "You can't do this," she blurted out. "Where are we supposed to get that kind of financing on such short notice?" "That's something the two of you will need to figure out with your bank," I replied evenly. "I'm moving into my new place." The reality of the situation hit them immediately. This wasn't a threat. It wasn't a negotiation. And it certainly wasn't another attempt to get their attention. It was a decision that had already been made. Years of emotional distance, entitlement, and disrespect had finally produced a consequence neither of them had expected. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic courtroom battles, no family intervention, just the natural result of treating someone as valuable only when they were useful. The next 3 months passed quickly. Downstairs, Ethan and Brooke rushed from one bank appointment to another, desperately trying to secure financing. Upstairs, I packed my belongings one box at a time. Ethan ultimately had to take out a substantial mortgage to buy out my $180,000 share of the property, a financial obligation that would affect their budget for years. As for me, I packed entirely on my own. Whenever someone offered to help, I politely declined. The process became more than moving. It became a chance to clear out years of accumulated clutter, both physical and emotional. Every box that left the apartment felt like another piece of unnecessary weight disappearing from my life. By the time moving day approached, I felt lighter than I had in years. The moving truck arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning, and the movers worked quickly and efficiently. Box after box disappeared into the truck while the house gradually emptied around me. Ethan stood near the mailbox, watching everything unfold. He looked smaller somehow, quieter and far more reflective than I had ever seen him before. Brooke never appeared. The curtains on the main floor remained firmly closed throughout the morning, and she stayed hidden behind them while the final pieces of my life were carried away. When the truck was fully loaded, I walked over to Ethan one last time. "I wish you guys the best with the house, Ethan," I said, extending my hand. He hesitated for a moment before taking it. Holding it briefly, he lowered his eyes and whispered, "I'm so sorry for how things turned out." "Mom," I offered him a gentle smile. "I'm not Ethan." This was exactly what needed to happen for all of us to finally have some clarity. For a moment, neither of us said anything else. Then I climbed into my car, pulled away from the curb, and drove off without once looking back in the rearview mirror. A profound sense of relief settled over me. The burden I had carried for years was finally gone. The road ahead felt open clean and entirely mine. My new townhouse was smaller than the old house, but it fit my life perfectly. Natural light filled the rooms throughout the day, the neighbors waved whenever we crossed paths at the mailbox, and the walking trail nearby quickly became one of my favorite places to spend an afternoon. For the first time in years, my phone could sit untouched on the entryway table for hours without making me anxious. The constant dread of receiving another demanding message had disappeared along with the old living arrangement. Ethan started calling about once a month. The calls were never long, but they were different. He called on his own initiative, and his tone was noticeably more respectful than it had been in years. We talked about the weather, the grandchildren's school activities, and the ordinary details of daily life. The old pattern of manipulation and expectation had quietly died. Brooke never contacted me at all. I considered that one of the greatest improvements to my daily peace of mind. Sometimes my thoughts drifted back to that birthday. Those 6 simple words. "I miss you guys so much." And the cold response that followed. "We're on vacation. Don't be so dramatic." At the time, those words felt devastating. Now I saw them differently. They had been a wake-up call. Sometimes being ignored completely is what finally allows you to recognize that you're standing in the wrong place. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is stop waiting for people to value you and quietly walk away. One afternoon, I sat on my new patio with a cup of tea in my hands, listening to the peaceful sounds of the neighborhood around me. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't demanded apologies. I hadn't started a fight. Instead, I had simply stepped out of their reach. The result was something I never expected. Peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. The kind that comes from finally choosing yourself after years of putting everyone else first. As the late afternoon sun settled across the patio, I leaned back in my chair and enjoyed the silence. It had taken a long time to get there, but without question it was the best decision I had ever made. As I sat on my patio that evening watching the last rays of sunlight fade across the quiet neighborhood, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. For a long time, I believed that keeping the peace meant sacrificing my own comfort, my own needs, and sometimes even my own dignity. What I learned instead was that love and respect are not the same thing. You can love people deeply and still refuse to let them take advantage of you. I don't hate Ethan, and I don't spend my days dwelling on Brooke. Life is too short for that. What happened taught me the importance of healthy boundaries and the value of standing up for myself before resentment has a chance to grow. In the end, I didn't lose my family. I simply stopped carrying responsibilities that were never mine to begin with. These days, my home is peaceful, my finances are my own, and my future feels lighter than it has in years. Looking back, I no longer see that painful birthday message as a rejection. I see it as the moment that finally pushed me toward a better chapter of my life. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't being appreciated. Sometimes it's realizing that your happiness no longer depends on the approval of other people.
This story is a work of fiction inspired by real-life situations that many people experience but rarely talk about openly. While the characters and events have been shaped for storytelling, the emotions, conflicts, and choices reflect truths that exist in everyday life. At Quiet Revenge Stories channel, every story is created to explore the complexity of human relationships, especially the difficult moments that test trust boundaries and self-worth. These stories are not just about drama, but about awareness, resilience, and the courage it takes to protect yourself when it matters most. The message behind our stories is simple, but powerful. Love should never require you to lose yourself, and kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. Life will sometimes place you in situations where you must choose between keeping peace and protecting your dignity, and in those moments, choosing yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of something real, consider supporting the channel by subscribing to Quiet Revenge Stories channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told, each one carrying a lesson, a reflection, or a truth worth hearing. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.